I still remember the exact sound of that morning at my lake cabin. The sun had just barely stretched itself over the horizon, painting the water in a soft golden glow. Mist curled up like breath from the lake surface, and the air carried that crisp silence only the wilderness can give. My office window looked straight out onto the dock, where my fishing boat rested, bobbing ever so slightly. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee filled the room as I shuffled through a stack of papers, contracts, and maps that I needed to review. What most people didn't know was that this wasn't just a retreat. This cabin was my headquarters, my office, my sanctuary, and sometimes my war room. I had built it with my own hands on family land, and every timber meant something to me. It was not just where I worked, it was where I plotted out the bigger moves of my life. That was the morning it happened. The morning Karen from the HOA stormed into my world. I had been hearing whispers about her for months. Neighbors at the lake muttering under their breath, people at the general store shaking their heads. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the homeowners association, a woman who thrived on rules she had written herself and fines she had invented out of thin air. She wasn't elected, she wasn't appointed, she just declared herself in charge, and most people were too tired or too afraid to challenge her. She had a reputation for pushing boundaries, storming onto people's property, snapping pictures of fences, counting how many cars sat in a driveway, even measuring lawns with a tape measure. If you didn't fall in line with her so-called bylaws, she'd make your life miserable. But me? I wasn't part of her game. My land didn't fall under her jurisdiction. My cabin stood on private property that had been deeded to my family long before her HOA was even an idea. And I had made that very clear to her in writing more than once. Still, that didn't stop her. That morning, the sharp knock at my office door felt less like a courtesy and more like an invasion. Before I could even rise from my chair, the door swung wide open, slamming against the wall with a force that rattled the frames of the photographs hanging beside it. And there she was, Karen. Her sharp features set in a permanent scowl, her hair perfectly sprayed into place, and a thick binder clutched under her arm like a weapon. She wore her badge of authority in the form of a gaudy HOA lanyard, as though it granted her the power of law enforcement. She marched inside without so much as an invitation, her eyes darting around my office as if she were already cataloging violations. "Do you have any idea," she began, her voice shrill and cutting, "that you are in violation of at least 6 community codes? 6. This cabin, this office you're running here, none of this is compliant. And don't think you can ignore me any longer." I leaned back in my chair, more amused than surprised. She had finally crossed the line I always knew she would. "Karen," I said slowly, savoring her name the way one might savor a bitter taste, "this is my private property. Not part of your little kingdom. You've got no authority here. None." Her eyes narrowed, her binder snapping open like the beak of a predator. She flipped through the pages, stabbing at lines of text with a manicured finger. "According to Section 12, Article 4, she declared, all properties adjacent to the lake fall under my association's guidelines. And that includes you. Which means that little dock out there." She pointed toward the window with a flourish. "Non-compliant. That shed by the trees? Illegal. And the fact that you're running an office out of this cabin? That's a commercial violation, and I could have you fined into bankruptcy before the month is over." Her words echoed in the stillness of the cabin. But I didn't flinch. If anything, I smiled. Because what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was who else was inside that cabin that morning. I stood slowly, not rushing, letting the tension build between us. She followed me with her eyes, clearly expecting me to argue or beg. But instead, I stepped aside and gestured toward the second door in the back of the office. The knob turned. The hinges creaked. And out stepped a man whose very presence shifted the atmosphere in the room. Tall, confident, dressed not in a suit but in the casual ease of someone who was entirely comfortable in his own skin. His face was one Karen had seen before, plastered across newspapers, shown on every television, and spoken about in nearly every household across the state. The governor. Her words died in her throat. The binder she clutched slipped from her hand, hitting the wooden floor with a heavy thud. Her jaw went slack, and for the first time the self-appointed queen of the HOA stood silent. The governor looked at her, then at me, then back at her again. And the smirk on his face said everything. This was no ordinary meeting. And Karen had just stepped into a storm she could never control. The silence in my cabin after the governor stepped out was thick enough to choke on. The only sound was the faint crackle of the fire in the stone hearth, a low hiss from the coffee pot, and the soft thud of Karen's binder still lying on the floor where she had dropped it. For the first time since I had met her, she had nothing to say. Her sharp tongue, her loud accusations, her rehearsed authority, gone. All of it vanished the moment she locked eyes with the man standing a few feet away from her. The governor didn't rush to speak. He let the silence stretch, and that was what made it more powerful. He knew, the way seasoned leaders do, that silence could command more than any shout. Finally, he took a slow step forward, his boots clicking against the wooden floor, his gaze fixed on Karen. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said, his voice calm, measured, but carrying the weight of iron behind it. "You seem to think you have authority here." Karen's lips twitched like she wanted to argue, but the words stuck. She tried to stand taller, adjusting the strap of her lanyard as if that flimsy badge could shield her from him. I was simply enforcing the bylaws," she stammered. "The Homeowners Association." "The Homeowners Association," he cut her off, his tone sharp now, "does not supersede state law. And it certainly does not reach onto private family land deeded long before your paperwork existed." He glanced at me, then back at her. "Do you realize who you are talking to right now? Do you realize what you've barged into?" Her eyes darted between us. The bravado that she carried into the cabin was unraveling before my eyes. She had come here certain she could bully, certain she could find me into submission. Now she was cornered, and worse, she knew it. "I was only trying to maintain community standards," she muttered, but her voice had lost its bite. I finally stepped in, leaning against my desk, arms crossed, my voice steady and clear. "Karen, I warned you. This property doesn't belong to your HOA. You've been trespassing, harassing, and inventing violations that hold no legal weight. And now," I gestured toward the governor, who stood like a wall beside me, "now you've dragged yourself into something much bigger." The governor moved closer, his presence towering over her. "Do you know how many complaints have reached my office about you?" he asked, each word deliberate. "Do you know how many families you've intimidated with threats of fines, foreclosure, and nonsense rules that were never law? I should thank you for storming in here today, because you've saved me the trouble of summoning you myself." Karen's face went pale. She bent quickly, scooping up her binder from the floor, hugging it to her chest like it could protect her. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Those complaints, they're exaggerations. People don't understand the importance of structure, of order. Without me, this community would fall apart." The governor raised a brow, studying her like she was an insect under glass. "Without you, people would actually live in peace. Do you think the lake belongs to you? Do you think these cabins, these docks, these families exist for you to control? Let me remind you, the only authority you've ever had is what the people allowed you. And it seems to me they never allowed this." She sputtered, looking to me as if I might step in and defend her, as if I'd forgotten all the headaches she'd caused not just me, but everyone within miles of the lake. But I didn't move. I wanted her to face it. The governor didn't stop there. He walked past her, toward the wide window that overlooked the shimmering water of the lake. He gestured outside with one hand. "Do you see that? This lake is public domain. The cabin sits on deeded land older than your association. And yet you stormed in here like a sheriff in an old western, waving your binder like a pistol, ready to shoot down anyone who didn't kneel to you. That ends today." Karen's binder shook in her grip. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, her eyes glassy. The authority she always wore like armor had crumbled into fear. I couldn't resist adding my own words, slow and deliberate. "Karen, you picked the wrong fight. You tried to bully me. You threatened me. And now you've embarrassed yourself in front of the governor of this state. Tell me, what do you think happens next?" Her silence was answer enough. The governor turned back toward her, his voice lower now, quieter, but somehow sharper for it. "You've forgotten what leadership means. Real leadership is service, not control. It's respect, not intimidation. What you've been doing isn't leadership. It's tyranny on a small scale. And small tyrants can grow into bigger ones if they're not stopped." She swallowed hard, her knuckles white around her binder. I didn't mean harm," she whispered. "I was protecting the neighborhood." "Protecting?" the governor echoed, disbelief etched into his tone. "By fining elderly couples because their mailbox paint was chipped? By threatening single parents with foreclosure because their kids' toys were left in the yard? By storming into a man's office uninvited? That isn't protection. That's abuse." The room seemed to close in on her. She shifted her weight, looking toward the door like she might run, but her legs stayed rooted in place. The governor finally stepped back, giving her a fraction of space, but his words pinned her in place. "Here's what's going to happen, Karen. You're going to walk out of this cabin. You're going to rethink everything you've been doing. Because if you don't, those complaints that have been piling up on my desk will become something more. Do you understand me? Her head bobbed quickly. Yes, Governor, she said, her voice a whisper. He studied her a moment longer, then nodded toward the door. Karen turned on her heel, binder clutched tight, and shuffled toward the exit. For the first time she looked small. Not the loud, overbearing force she had always pretended to be, but small, diminished, deflated. She reached the door, pulled it open, and stepped into the bright morning sunlight without another word. The door clicked shut behind her. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was calm. Cling. Like a storm had passed and left the air fresher for it. I turned to the governor, exhaling slowly. You handled that better than I would have, I admitted. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Bullies always think they're the biggest presence in the room. Until they're not. He glanced at the stack of papers on my desk, then back at me. But something tells me this isn't the end. People like her don't just walk away. They scheme. They find angles. You should be ready for her next move. I knew he was right. Karen had been silenced, but not defeated. And deep down I could already sense it. This battle wasn't finished. The governor poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot, the steam rising between us. He raised the mug slightly in my direction. For now, though, he said, let's enjoy the quiet while it lasts. But quiet has a way of ending sooner than you expect. For the rest of that day after the governor silenced her, the lake felt different. The air seemed lighter. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the water rippled with the kind of peace that only comes after a storm. I sat at my desk longer than I should have, sipping coffee, flipping through papers, and staring out the window at the dock. The memory of Karen's pale face when the governor called her out replayed in my mind, and for a moment, I allowed myself the dangerous thought that maybe, just maybe, she was gone for good. But people like Karen don't vanish that easily. A week later, the first sign arrived in the form of a letter. It wasn't in an envelope from the HOA. No, she had grown smarter, at least she thought she had. Instead, the letter came on cheap paper with no official seal, typed in blocky font, unsigned. But I knew the style. The threats were unmistakable. You think you're above the rules? It read. But everyone pays their dues. Everyone. I set the paper down slowly, a grin spreading across my face. She hadn't learned a thing. Being humiliated by the governor hadn't changed her nature. If anything, it had poured gasoline on her pride. The governor had warned me this would happen. And he had been right. 2 days later she escalated. I was out by the dock, repairing one of the ropes that had frayed, when I heard voices in the distance. Multiple voices, growing louder as they approached. I turned and saw Karen leading a group of people down the path toward my cabin. They weren't neighbors I recognized. They weren't locals. They were outsiders, hired muscle types, tall men in dark sunglasses, the kind who thought crossing their arms made them intimidating. Karen marched in front, binder in hand like always, though now it looked more like a shield than a weapon. She called out before she even reached the porch. You can't hide behind the governor forever, she shouted. This land, this cabin, this office, it's going to be brought under control. My control. I stood on the dock, rope still in hand, and let her words wash over me. Behind her, the men tried to look menacing, but all I saw were lost souls hired for a job they didn't understand. You brought backup this time, I said casually. Guess you didn't like standing here alone last time. Her face flushed red. You think this is a game? You embarrassed me. You humiliated me in front of the most powerful man in this state. Do you think I'm just going to let that go? No. No, I will show everyone that the HOA is stronger than you. Stronger than him. Stronger than anyone. She turned to the men behind her, gesturing toward my cabin. Remove him. Remove his things. Tear down that dock. We're taking control. The men shifted, uneasy. They weren't expecting to be ordered to tear down a cabin. One of them muttered something under his breath. But before they could act, a familiar sound cut through the air. Engines. From the road above, a convoy of black SUVs rolled down the dirt path, tires crunching over gravel. The sunlight caught their tinted windows, and the sight made Karen freeze in place. She knew just as I did what those vehicles meant. The governor was back. The SUVs pulled up beside my cabin, dust rising around them. Doors opened, and out stepped not just the governor but his aides, state officials, and even a pair of uniformed officers. This time it wasn't a private visit. This was official. Karen's confidence evaporated on the spot. Her binder slipped again, and her hired muscles slowly backed away, realizing they were in way over their heads. The governor strode forward, his voice carrying like thunder. Karen. I warned you. She tried to speak, tried to regain her footing, but the words came out jumbled. I was only, These people, this property. No, he interrupted, his hand raised. This ends today. You've crossed the line for the last time. He turned to the officers. You have the complaints. You have the affidavits. You know what to do. The officers moved forward, their presence sealing her fate. Karen stumbled back, shaking her head furiously. You can't do this. I am the HO. I am the law here. The governor's voice cut her down. You are nothing but a bully hiding behind a binder of fake rules. And now you'll answer for it. The officers took hold of her arms. She thrashed, binder flying open, pages scattering across the dirt like feathers in the wind. Her voice grew shrill, desperate. This is my neighborhood. My authority. You can't. But her words dissolved into the sound of the lake breeze and the steady steps of law carrying her away. Her hired men? They scattered, disappearing into the woods, not wanting to be anywhere near her downfall. Within minutes, the woman who had terrorized the lake community for years was gone, her power stripped, her binder torn and useless on the ground. The governor turned to me then, his expression softening. Sometimes, he said, justice takes time. But it always arrives. I nodded slowly, watching the last page of her binder flutter into the water, carried away by the ripples. I just wish it hadn't taken so long. He placed a hand on my shoulder. People like her thrive on fear. But once fear is broken, so are they. And today, everyone saw it happen. The neighbors began to arrive soon after, drawn by the noise and the sight of SUVs at the cabin. They gathered along the path, whispering, pointing, their eyes wide. For the first time they weren't afraid of her. For the first time they looked free. One elderly couple stepped forward, their hands clasped together. Thank you, the woman said softly. She's made our lives miserable for years. We thought we'd never be rid of her. The governor shook his head. Don't thank me. Thank the man who stood his ground, he said, gesturing toward me. I felt the weight of their eyes, their gratitude. It wasn't why I had fought her, but it mattered all the same. That night, when the SUVs had left and the crowd had dispersed, I sat by the fire in my cabin. The lake outside was calm, reflecting the stars above. The dock creaked gently as the water lapped against it. For the first time in months I felt true peace. Karen was gone. The governor had made sure of it. And as the flames danced in the hearth, I realized something important. People like her would always exist. People who fed off control, who mistook intimidation for power. But as long as there were those willing to stand against them, as long as truth and law stood taller than lies, bullies like Karen would always fall. The cabin remained mine. The lake remained free. And Karen? She faded into the past, a warning, a story to be told around firesides. But me? I carried on, stronger for it, with the governor's words etched in my mind. Justice takes time. But it always arrives. And when it does, it silences even the loudest of voices. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more crazy HOA dramas, and turn on the bell so you never miss what happens next.